The autumn wind howled across the desolate plains of Wyoming Territory, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Samuel Morrison pulled his weathered coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse through the narrow canyon that led to his ranch. The setting sun painted the rocky walls in shades of amber and crimson, but Samuel barely noticed the beauty that surrounded him. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the familiar darkness that had consumed him for the past 3 years. At 45, Samuel was a man haunted by loss. His wife Catherine had died in childbirth, taking their unborn son with her to the grave. The ranch that had once echoed with laughter and dreams of a growing family now stood as silent as a tomb, its empty rooms serving as monuments to a future that would never be. The neighbors whispered that grief had driven him half mad, that he talked to shadows and spent his evenings drinking whiskey while staring at daguerreotypes of his dead wife. They weren't entirely wrong. Samuel's once prosperous cattle operation had dwindled to barely sustainable numbers. Without Catherine's steady hand managing the household finances and her encouragement pushing him forward, he had let everything slide into disrepair. Fences went unmended, buildings leaked, and several of his prize bulls had wandered off during a particularly bad storm last spring. He hadn't bothered to look for them. On this particular evening, as Samuel approached his homestead, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The desperate lowing of cattle in distress. It was coming from the north pasture where he kept his pregnant cows. Samuel spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and the first stirring of purpose he'd felt in months. What he found there nearly broke what remained of his spirit. His best heifer, Rosie, lay on her side in the muddy grass, her breathing labored and her eyes wide with pain. She was trying to birth her calf, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. The calf was positioned badly, and from the looks of things, both mother and baby would die without immediate help. Samuel had assisted with difficult births before, but his hands shook too badly now, and his mind was too clouded with whiskey and sorrow to think clearly. "Come on, girl," he whispered, kneeling beside Rosie in the mud. "Don't you die on me too." But even as he spoke the words, he could see death creeping into the heifer's eyes, and he felt the familiar weight of helplessness settling over him like a burial shroud. Everything he touched seemed to wither and die. Maybe the whispered rumors in town were true. Maybe he was cursed. That's when she appeared. Samuel first saw her as a shadow moving against the dark, ening sky, a figure walking toward him with purposeful strides across the open pasture. As she drew closer, he could make out more details. A woman, tall and slender, with long dark hair that whipped around her face in the wind. She wore a simple brown dress and a black shawl, and there was something about the way she moved, fluid and confident, like she belonged to the land itself, that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. "Your cow needs help," she said when she reached him, and her voice was like honey poured over gravel, smooth but with an underlying strength that commanded attention. Samuel scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware of how he must look, unshaven, unwashed, reeking of whiskey and despair. "Who are you? What are you doing on my land?" The woman ignored his questions and knelt beside Rosie, placing her hands on the heifer's swollen belly. "She's been laboring too long. The calf is breached." She looked up at Samuel with eyes the color of storm clouds. "Do you have clean rags? Hot water?" Yes, but Samuel stammered, confused and somehow mesmerized by this strange woman's calm authority. "Get them, now." Her tone brooked no argument. Samuel found himself running toward the house, his mind reeling. He had no idea who this woman was or where she had come from, but something about her presence had cut through the fog of his grief, and alcohol like a sharp blade. For the first time in months, he felt clear-headed and focused on something other than his own misery. When he returned with the supplies, the woman had already begun working. Her hands moved with practiced skill, and she murmured soft words to Rosie in a language Samuel didn't recognize, something that sounded like Spanish mixed with words that seemed older, more primal. As she worked, Samuel noticed something strange wherever her hands touched the cow. A faint warmth seemed to emanate, and Rosie's panicked breathing began to slow and steady. "Hold her head," the woman instructed, and Samuel obeyed without question. For the next hour, Samuel watched in amazement as this mysterious stranger worked with a skill that surpassed any veterinarian he had ever seen. Her movements were precise and confident, and she seemed to know exactly what the cow needed before Rosie even showed signs of distress. More than once, Samuel could have sworn he saw a faint glow around the woman's hands, but he told himself it was just the last rays of sunlight playing tricks on his eyes. When the calf finally emerged, healthy, breathing, and immediately nuzzling against its mother, Samuel felt something crack open inside his chest. It was joy, pure and simple, an emotion he had thought was lost to him forever. "How did you?" he began, but when he looked up, the woman was already standing, wiping her hands clean on one of his rags. "Your cow will be fine," she said simply. "The calf too. Make sure they both get plenty of water and keep them warm tonight." "Wait," Samuel called as she turned to leave. "I don't even know your name. How can I thank you?" The woman paused and looked back at him over her shoulder. In the fading light, her face was both beautiful and mysterious, with high cheekbones and skin that seemed to glow with an inner warmth. "I'm Elena," she said quietly. "Elena Vasquez, and you don't need to thank me. Helping is what we do for each other." "Elena," Samuel repeated, tasting the name on his tongue. "I'm Samuel Morrison. This is my ranch, and I owe you everything. That cow, she's all I have left." Something flickered in Elena's storm-gray eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the pain that colored his words. "We all have losses, Mr. Morrison. The important thing is not to let them consume us." Before Samuel could respond, she was walking away across the pasture, her figure growing smaller and more indistinct until she seemed to melt into the darkness itself. Samuel stood there for a long time, watching the place where she had disappeared, wondering if he had dreamed the entire encounter. But Rosie was alive, her calf was nursing strongly, and for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Morrison went to bed sober and filled with something that might have been hope. That night, he dreamed of Catherine for the first time since her death without waking up screaming. In his dream, she smiled at him and said, "It's time, Samuel. It's time to start living again." When he woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through his bedroom window, and he could hear Rosie lowing contentedly in the pasture. Samuel dressed quickly and went outside to check on her and the calf, half convinced that the previous evening had been nothing more than a whiskey-induced hallucination. But there were footprints in the mud beside the water trough, small, delicate prints that definitely belonged to a woman, and pinned to his fence post was a small bundle of herbs tied with a piece of string, along with a note written in careful script, "For the calf. Steep in warm water and give twice daily for the first week." Samuel held the note for a long time, studying the elegant handwriting and wondering about the mysterious woman who had appeared in his darkest hour like an answer to a prayer. He hadn't even known he was praying. In the days that followed, strange rumors began to circulate in the nearby town of Clearwater. Old Mrs. Patterson swore she had seen a woman walking across the prairie in the middle of the night, moving faster than any human should be able to move. Young Tommy Henderson claimed he had witnessed someone talking to a pack of wolves up in the hills, and that the wolves had listened to her like trained dogs. But it was when Elena appeared at the Jennings farm to help deliver Sarah Jennings' baby, a birth that had been going badly for 2 days before Elena's arrival, that the whispers really began in earnest. The baby had been born healthy despite all expectations, and Sarah had recovered from her ordeal with remarkable speed. But several of the women who had been present swore that they had seen Elena's hands glowing with an otherworldly light, and that she had spoken words that made the very air in the room hum with power, which they whispered to each other in the general store and after church services. "That woman is a witch, mark my words." Samuel heard the rumors but paid them no mind. All he knew was that Elena had saved Rosie and her calf, and that the brief encounter with her had awakened something in him that he had thought was dead forever. He found himself looking forward to each day for the first time in years, half hoping and half fearing that he might see her again. He didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after Elena's first appearance at the Morrison Ranch, the town of Clearwater was buzzing with fearful whispers and mounting hysteria. What had started as idle gossip about a mysterious woman had grown into something much darker and more dangerous. The local preacher, Reverend Josiah Blackwood, had begun delivering fiery sermons about the dangers of witchcraft and the devil's servants. Walking among God-fearing Christian folk, Samuel first became aware of the growing tension. When he rode into town for supplies on a crisp October morning, the usual friendly nods and casual greetings he received from his neighbors were replaced by suspicious stares and hurried conversations that stopped abruptly. When he approached, at Mueller's General Store, the atmosphere was thick with barely contained hostility. Samuel Morrison called out Judge Harrison Webb, the town's most influential citizen, as Samuel was loading sacks of grain into his wagon. "Just the man I wanted to see." Webb approached with a small group of men that included Reverend Blackwood, Sheriff Tom Bradley, and several of the town's leading merchants. Their faces were grim, and Samuel felt his chest tighten with apprehension. "Judge Webb," Samuel nodded. "Respectfully, gentlemen, what can I do for you?" "It's more about what you can do for this community," Samuel, Webb said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We understand you've had encounters with the woman they call Elena Vasquez." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I've met her, yes. She helped me with a difficult cattle birth, saved my cow and her calf. Did she now?" Reverend Blackwood stepped forward, his pale eyes glittering with zealous fervor. "And what did she ask for in return? What bargain did you strike with this creature?" "Bargain?" Samuel's voice rose incredulously. "There was no bargain. She helped because it was the right thing to do, and she asked for nothing in return." "Nothing you were aware of," the Reverend insisted. "The devil's servants are cunning, Samuel. They perform their small kindnesses to gain trust, to worm their way into the hearts of good Christian folk. And then, when you least expect it, they demand payment." Sheriff Bradley, a heavyset man with tired eyes, placed a restraining hand on the Reverend's arm. "Now, Josiah, let's not get ahead of ourselves." He turned to Samuel. "Sam, the thing is, we've been hearing stories, disturbing stories about this Elena woman. Folks say she can heal with just a touch, that she talks to animals, that she knows things she shouldn't know, and that makes her a witch." Samuel asked, his anger building. "Maybe she's just a skilled healer. Maybe she has experience with animals. There are rational explanations for everything you've mentioned." "Rational explanations?" scoffed Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a thin, nervous man who served as the town's physician. "I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, Samuel, and I've never seen anything like what this woman can supposedly do. When the Jennings baby was born, he wasn't breathing. By all medical knowledge, that child should have died. But according to multiple witnesses, Elena Vasquez simply placed her hands on the infant, and he began to breathe." His color returned. "There was no medical intervention, no logical explanation." "Maybe your medical knowledge isn't as complete as you think it is," Samuel shot back, immediately regretting the harsh words when he saw the doctor's face flush with anger. Judge Webb raised his hand for silence. "Gentlemen, please." "Samuel, we're not here to argue with you. We're here because we're concerned about you, about this community, and about the influence this woman might be having on good, decent people." "She's done nothing but help people," Samuel said firmly. "If that's witchcraft, then maybe we need more witches in this world." The group exchanged alarmed glances at his words. Reverend Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Samuel, listen to yourself. Do you hear what you're saying? This woman has bewitched you. Just as she's bewitched half the county. People are abandoning their faith, turning to folk magic and pagan superstitions. She's a cancer on this community, and she must be stopped." "Stopped how?" Samuel asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "She needs to leave," Sheriff Bradley said bluntly. "Voluntarily would be best, but one way or another, she can't stay here. It's not safe, for her or for anyone else. And if she refuses to go..." The men exchanged meaningful looks, and Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. He had lived through the war, had seen what happened when fear and righteousness combined to create mob justice. He had hoped those dark days were behind them, but the expressions on these men's faces told him otherwise. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Judge Webb said diplomatically. Samuel, we're asking for your help. You know this woman. You've spoken with her. Convince her to move on, for everyone's sake. And if I refuse, the silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Sheriff Bradley spoke up, his voice heavy with regret. Then you'd be making a mistake. Sam, a big one. Samuel climbed onto his wagon without another word, his mind racing as he drove out of town. The threat had been clear, even if it hadn't been stated directly. If Elena didn't leave voluntarily, the town would find a way to force her out. And if Samuel continued to defend her, he might find himself sharing her fate. As he drove through the countryside toward his ranch, Samuel's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of smoke rising from the direction of his property. His heart leaped into his throat as he whipped his horses into a gallop, fearing the worst. But when he crested the hill overlooking his homestead, he saw that the smoke was coming from his chimney, and there was a figure moving around in his vegetable garden. Elena straightened up as he approached, a basket of late-season vegetables. In her arms, she was wearing a simple blue dress, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. In the afternoon sunlight, she looked almost ordinary, just a woman tending to a garden, but Samuel could see the wariness in her eyes. As she watched him dismount, "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing toward the basket. "Your garden was overrun with weeds, and some of the vegetables were ready for harvest. I thought they shouldn't go to waste." Samuel looked at his garden, or rather, what used to be his garden. For the past 3 years, he had barely maintained it, allowing weeds to choke out most of his crops. But now it was neat and orderly, with healthy plants bearing more fruit than he had seen in years. "How did you?" he began, but Elena cut him off with a gentle smile. "Hard work and a little knowledge of what plants need to thrive," she said, nothing more mysterious than that. But Samuel could see that wasn't entirely true. The transformation of his garden was remarkable, almost miraculous. No amount of hard work could account for the abundance he was seeing, especially this late in the season. "Elena," he said seriously, "we need to talk. The people in town, they're saying things about you, dangerous things." Her smile faded, and she set down the basket of vegetables. "What kind of things?" "They think you're a witch. They want you to leave the area, and if you don't..." Samuel trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "If I don't, they'll make me leave," Elena finished for him. "I've heard it all before, Samuel. In every town, in every place I've ever tried to make a home. Then why don't you just go?" The words came out harsher than he had intended, and he immediately regretted them when he saw the hurt flash across Elena's face. "Because I'm tired of running," she said quietly. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. For the first time in years, I've found a place where I feel peaceful, where I feel like maybe I could belong." Samuel felt something twist in his chest at her words. "Elena, I don't want you to go either. But these people, they're serious. They could hurt you." She looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes searching his face. "Are you afraid of me, Samuel?" The question caught him off guard. Was he afraid of her? He thought about the way she had saved Rosie, about the impossible transformation of his garden, about the strange dreams that had been visiting him since their first meeting. Dreams where Catherine told him it was time to let go of his grief and embrace life again. "No," he said finally, and realized he meant it. "I'm not afraid of you, but I am afraid for you." Elena stepped closer to him, so close he could smell the scent of lavender and sunshine that seemed to cling to her hair. "What if they're right? Samuel, what if I am what they think I am?" Samuel reached out and gently touched her face, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Then you're the kind of witch who brings life instead of death, who heals instead of harms. And if that's evil, then I don't understand the meaning of the word." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, and for a moment, Samuel thought she might collapse into his arms. Instead, she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold something in. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "You don't know what I am, what I'm capable of." "Then show me," Samuel said. "Whatever you are, whatever you can do, I want to understand." Elena looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing a decision that could change everything between them. Finally, she held out her hand, palm up. "Give me your hand, Samuel. But know that once you see the truth, There's no going back to not knowing. Samuel didn't hesitate. He placed his hand in hers and immediately felt a warmth spread up his arm. But it was more than warmth. It was like touching a live wire. A connection to something vast and powerful and infinitely gentle. As their hands touched, Samuel felt something extraordinary happen. His vision seemed to expand, and suddenly, he could see things he had never noticed before. He could see the life force flowing through the plants in his garden, could feel the contentment of his cattle in the pasture, could sense the very heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet. But more than that, he could feel Elena's emotions as if they were his own, her loneliness, so deep and aching it took his breath away, her fear, not of death but of never being accepted for who she truly was, her love, a love so pure and powerful it made his knees weak, a love that was directed entirely at him. Elena, he breathed, and she quickly pulled her hand away, breaking the connection. Now you know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not human, Samuel. Not entirely. My grandmother was Navajo, a medicine woman who could speak to the spirits of the earth. My grandfather was something else, something old and powerful that took human form long enough to father my mother. Samuel stared at her, his mind reeling from what he had experienced. What are you saying? I'm saying that the people in town aren't entirely wrong. I do have power that most people would call magic. I can heal with my hands. I can make plants grow. I can see things that others can't see. Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if sharing her secret was lifting a weight from her shoulders. I can feel the pain of every living thing around me, and I can't help but try to ease that pain whenever I can. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and sure. Elena, I don't care what you are. You saved my cattle, you've brought life back to my garden, and you've brought hope back to my heart. If that makes you a witch, then I'm grateful for witches. Elena looked at him with amazement, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. The townspeople will never accept me, Samuel. If you stand with me, they'll turn against you too. Samuel thought about the men he had faced in town, about their thinly veiled threats and their righteous anger. Then he looked at Elena, at this remarkable woman who had given him back his will to live and made his choice. Let them, he said simply. I've been dead inside for 3 years, Elena. You've made me feel alive again. I'm not going to let fear take that away from me. As if summoned by his words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Samuel turned to see a group of riders approaching his ranch, and his blood ran cold when he recognized the faces: Judge Webb, Sheriff Bradley, Reverend Blackwood, and half a dozen other men from town, all armed and looking grimly determined. They've come for me, Elena said quietly, but there was no fear in her voice, only a weary resignation. They'll have to go through me first, Samuel replied, and he meant every word. The confrontation Samuel had been dreading arrived with the dust cloud of 8 mounted men, their faces hard with righteous determination and fear. Judge Harrison Webb rode at the front, his silver-headed cane glinting in the afternoon sun, while Reverend Blackwood clutched a worn Bible to his chest like a shield. Sheriff Bradley's hand rested on his gun, and the other men, merchants, farmers, and town council members, carried rifles and ropes with the grim efficiency of a hunting party. Samuel stepped forward to meet them, positioning himself between the riders and Elena, who stood quietly behind him with her hands clasped in front of her. There was an ethereal calm about her that seemed to emanate outward, settling over the scene like morning mist. But Samuel could feel the tension coiled beneath her serene exterior. Judge Webb, Samuel said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. You're trespassing on my land. Webb dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. We're here on official business, Samuel. The town council met in emergency session this morning and voted unanimously. This woman is a threat to our community and must be removed immediately. What crime has she committed? Samuel demanded. What law has she broken? The laws of God and nature, Reverend Blackwood interjected, sliding down from his horse with the awkward movements of a man, more accustomed to pulpits than saddles. This creature practices the dark arts, Samuel. She consorts with demons and perverts the natural order with her unholy powers. Elena finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I've harmed no one, Reverend. Every person I've helped has been made whole and healthy. If that's evil, then perhaps your definition of good and evil needs examination." Several of the men shifted uncomfortably at her words, but Reverend Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "Blasphemy! You dare to question the word of God?" "I question the words of men who claim to speak for God while showing no compassion for their fellow human beings," Elena replied calmly. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his expression pained. "Ma'am, I don't want any trouble here. The easiest thing would be for you to just pack up and move on. There are other places, other towns where folks might be more accepting of your kind." "My kind?" Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. "And what kind would that be, Sheriff? A woman who heals the sick, someone who helps bring life into the world, or simply a person who looks different and thinks differently than you're comfortable with?" Samuel watched the interplay with growing admiration for Elena's courage and growing anger at the men who had invaded his land. "She's done nothing wrong," he said firmly. "She's helped people, saved lives. If you can't see the good in that, then maybe you're the ones who've lost your way." Judge Webb's voice took on the authoritative tone he used in his courtroom. "Samuel, you're clearly not thinking rationally. This woman has bewitched you, clouded your judgment. Step aside and let us handle this matter." "No." The word came out harder than Samuel intended, but he didn't soften it. "This is my land, and Elena is my guest. You have no authority here." "Actually, we do." Webb pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Emergency writ from the territorial court. It gives us the authority to remove any person deemed a threat to public safety." Samuel's jaw clenched as he recognized the legal maneuvering. Webb had used his influence to railroad through a document that would give their actions a veneer of legitimacy. "That's not worth the paper it's written on, and you know it." "It's legal enough," Webb replied coldly. "Now step aside, or we'll consider you in contempt of court." For a moment, the two groups faced each other in tense silence. Samuel could feel the weight of the moment, the choice that would define not just his future, but the kind of man he would be for the rest of his life. Behind him, Elena remained still and quiet, but he could sense her preparing for whatever was to come. It was Dr. Thornfield who broke the silence, his nervous voice cutting through the tension. Perhaps we could reach some sort of compromise. Miss Vasquez, would you be willing to submit to an examination, a test of sorts, to prove that your abilities come from God rather than other sources?" Elena's laugh was soft, but held no humor. "And who would judge such a test?" "Doctor, men who have already decided I'm guilty of witchcraft. What would convince you of my innocence? Performing miracles that prove my guilt, or refusing to perform them and being condemned for that refusal? Scripture provides clear guidance," Reverend Blackwood declared, raising his Bible. "Suffer not a witch to live. The Lord's will is plain." "The Lord's will," Elena repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Reverend, when Jesus healed the sick and raised the dead, did the religious authorities of his time not also call him a threat to public order? Did they not also demand his removal?" Blackwood's face went white with rage. "How dare you compare yourself to our Savior? That's blasphemy of the highest order." Samuel felt Elena's hand touch his shoulder gently, and immediately he was filled with a sense of calm certainty that seemed to flow from her into him. When she spoke, her voice carried a power that made everyone present fall silent. "I compare myself to no one," she said, "but I will not be condemned by men who mistake fear for faith, who choose hatred over compassion. You speak of God's will, but I see little of God in what you're doing here today." As she spoke, Samuel became aware of subtle changes in their surroundings. The wind had died to complete stillness, and the very air seemed to thrum with an almost electrical energy. The horses began to shift nervously, and several of the men looked around with growing unease. "You want to see what I am," Elena continued, stepping forward. "You want proof of my nature?" She held out her hands, palms up, and Samuel watched in amazement as a soft, golden light began to emanate from her skin. It wasn't bright enough to hurt the eyes, but it was clearly visible to everyone present. Several of the men gasped and reached for their weapons, but they seemed unable to move, held frozen by the same power that was creating the light. "I am what your ancestors would have called a bridge walker," Elena said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone listening. I walk between the world of spirit and the world of flesh, carrying healing from one to the other. I am no more evil than the sun that makes your crops grow or the rain that fills your wells. As she spoke, Samuel felt that expanding sensation. Again, his awareness stretching beyond the normal boundaries of his senses. He could feel the life force of every person present, could sense their emotions as clearly as if they were his own. Most of the men were afraid, yes, but underneath that fear was something else, a deep, aching hunger for the very thing they were trying to destroy. They wanted magic in their lives, wanted wonder and mystery and the possibility that there was more to existence than the grinding routine of survival. But it was Judge Webb who surprised him most. Beneath the man's stern exterior, Samuel could sense a profound sadness, a grief so deep it rivaled his own. Webb had lost someone too, a daughter. Samuel realized, a little girl who had died young, and left her father's heart shattered. Elena must have sensed it too, because she turned her glowing eyes toward the judge. "Your daughter Sarah," she said softly. "She came to you in dreams for months after she died, trying to tell you she was safe, trying to ease your pain. But you convinced yourself the dreams were just grief talking, and you stopped listening." Webb's face went ashen, and his hands began to tremble. How could you possibly know about that?" "Because she's still trying to reach you," Elena replied gently. "She wants you to know that she's not suffering, that she's surrounded by love and light. She wants you to stop punishing yourself for not being able to save her from the fever." The judge staggered as if he'd been struck, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Sarah, my little Sarah, she forgives you for all the things you think you did wrong," Elena continued, her voice filled with infinite compassion. "She wants you to forgive yourself and find joy again, she says. She says to tell you that the music box still plays her favorite song, and that every time you wind it up, she dances." Webb collapsed to his knees, sobbing openly now. The other men looked round uncertainly, their righteous anger deflated by this unexpected turn of events. Even Reverend Blackwood seemed shaken, his grip on his Bible loosening. Elena's light gradually faded as she turned to address the group as a whole. "I don't ask you to understand what I am or how I do what I do. I only ask that you judge me by my actions rather than your fears. I've harmed no one. I've helped where I could. If that makes me a threat to your community, then perhaps you need to examine what kind of community you're trying to protect." Sheriff Bradley was the first to find his voice. "Ma'am, this is all very..." He struggled for words, then gave up and simply holstered his gun. "Judge, I think maybe we should reconsider this whole situation." But it was Dr. Thornfield who provided the turning point. The nervous physician stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Miss Vasquez, my wife, she's been ill for months. Consumption, I think, though I haven't been able to help her. The other doctors I've consulted say there's nothing to be done." He paused, swallowing hard. Could you look at her?" Elena studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can, doctor. But healing isn't just about what I can do. It's about what the person is ready to receive. Sometimes the body knows when it's time to let go." "I understand," Thornfield said quietly. I have to try everything." The tension in the air was broken by Judge Webb struggling to his feet, his face streaked with tears but his voice steady. "Men, I think we've made a mistake here today, a serious mistake." He looked directly at Elena. "Miss Vasquez, I owe you an apology." "We all do," Reverend Blackwood sputtered in protest. "Judge, you can't be serious. This woman is clearly a practitioner of the dark arts. She used unholy powers to manipulate your emotions. She told me things only my daughter could have known," Webb replied firmly. "Things that brought me comfort for the first time since Sarah died. If that's the devil's work, then the devil is more merciful than most Christians I know." One by one, the other men began to shift their positions, literally and figuratively. Samuel watched the transformation with a mixture of relief and amazement. Fear was giving way to curiosity, hostility to cautious hope. Not all of them would be convinced. He could see that Blackwood and a few others were still rigid with disapproval. but enough minds had been changed to prevent immediate violence. As the sun began to set over the prairie, the confrontation that could have ended in tragedy instead became something like a community meeting. Dr. Thornfield arranged for Elena to visit his wife the following day. Judge Webb asked quietly if she might be able to help him understand more of what his daughter was trying to communicate. Even Sheriff Bradley admitted that his rheumatism had been bothering him and wondered if she might have any herbal remedies that could help. Samuel stood beside Elena as the group prepared to leave, marveling at how completely the situation had transformed.